Good evening and welcome to Voices on Madhouse TV Studios. I'm Alice, and this show is about abuse in every form. So last week, if you remember, I left a question out there for everyone. And the question is, does substance use cause domestic violence? So I've left it out there. You've had a whole week to think about it. So if you think you have the answer and you want to call in here, the number here is 631-669-7999. And please do call and let us know what you think about that. So tonight I have a very wonderful guest and a very close friend and colleague, Anthony Rizzuto, Clinical Director of the Power Control Program at the Seafield Center. And we're very lucky to have him because he's a very busy man.
Thanks, Alice.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say everything you do, but you are a busy man and
Yes.
You do a lot. So why don't you give us an idea of everything you do?
Sure. Well, I'll just give you a small version. About 11 years ago, I made a career move. I changed and I came into the field of substance abuse treatment. That's my passion. That's what I love to do. So I came from a place of being in my own business to coming into helping people that struggle with the disease of addiction. Came in, started working for an agency called Seafield, which I'm still at 11 years later, and got involved in substance abuse treatment, looking to help people to be able to come out of the gates of hell, so to speak, of addiction. Yeah. And so I started doing that and worked my way through from case manager to senior counselor to clinical supervisor. And throughout that process, I was looking to get involved and, just continue growing in the field. And the agency decided that they wanted to send me for training to do domestic violence work. And I'll be honest with you, I really had no desire to do domestic violence work. That was not something that I had any interest in at the time. I really didn't have any tolerance for it. The last thing I could see myself doing was be sitting in a circle with abusive people. But that's where my path took me. And they sent me for a training. I went to the first session, came back and said, this ain't for me. And I went to the second session, and I came back and said, you don't understand, this isn't for me. And then on the third session is when it happened for me, when the psychologist said that 90 to 95% of men that are abusive to their partners grew up in a home where they were the victim, they witnessed it, or both. And that's when it changed for me, when I was able to separate the behavior from the human being that was sitting in front of me.
Okay.
So I've been doing now, that back in 2006, they asked me if I'd become the program supervisor, and I accepted the position. So I wear two hats right now with Seafield. I'm in the provider relations department, so I kind of go out and represent Seafield at different stakeholder meetings and go out and visit hospitals and pretty much let people know about what Seafield has to offer in terms of substance abuse treatment. And I'm also the program supervisor for the Power and Control program. The Power and Control program is a program that's designed to provide services for perpetrators of domestic violence, and specifically male perpetrators of domestic violence.
Oh, there's only males? I didn't
Yes.
realize that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
why is that? Why did they decide to just separate?
Well, I'll tell you what happened was when I first went for the training, the program was already in place, and the program was designed to work with male perpetrators of domestic violence, but we would screen everybody that came through the door.
Okay.
So if we identified survivors of domestic violence or victims of domestic violence, we would look to make a referral out to the local agency. So depending on which site it was, if it was in Riverhead, we might make a referral to the retreat. If it was Patchogue or Medford, we might make a referral to Vibes. If it was in Amityville, we might make a referral to the Coalition or Brighter Tomorrows. So we would look to provide services for victims of domestic violence where we would refer them out, and then we would work with the abusers. In the years that I've been doing this, when I first started, there really weren't a lot of people that were providing services for the perpetrators.
No.
There's been services for survivors of domestic violence, which there definitely should be, but my perspective is that if you have a person who is abusive, they probably will have several victims in their
Absolutely.
path. So if there's something that we can do to possibly intervene, to change the course or to help and facilitate some kind of intervention, then I think we have to do whatever we possibly can.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. Because, I mean, I think we call that serial battering or serial abusive behavior. And I used to work, as you know, at the coalition. I used to be the counselor at the shelter. And there have been times that, you know, there was someone there, and now we got someone later on that had the same abuser. This is like 5 or 10 years later, you know, and so now that abuser has another victim. And so, yes, you know, if the goal is to end domestic violence and to end abuse, then we have to treat both.
Right. And I think to me, my perception is, at least where I stand today, is there's really 3 parts to domestic violence. There is the survivor, there's the perpetrator, and there's the role that society plays in it. And the role that society plays in it in a couple of different ways. What gender norms look like, what holding perpetrators accountable for their behavior looks like. So I think that there's different pieces to this puzzle of domestic violence, but I do think that, like I said, you know, for me, I had no desire whatsoever to work in domestic violence. But once I got involved in it and started realizing, you know, what would it be like if I'm growing up and what I am seeing and believing to be normal, I come to realize is not normal. So I'm born with a clean slate, and when my belief system starts to develop, you know, that's where I start getting my ideas of what life is. So I get some ideas from watching Dad, and I get some ideas from watching Mom, and that's where my belief system starts to get created. So if I grow up in a dysfunctional home and I start seeing certain things, that could play a part in the way I'm going to negotiate life as I grow up.
Absolutely, yes. And that's the same thing with the victim, who is also seeing the same thing. Many of them do come from homes of domestic violence where they're watching the victim, and, you know, they could either take on the role of the abuser or take on the role of the victim. It could go either way. I mean, there are male victims as well.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
and they've taken on that role. So it could go either way. I remember when I was doing talks around, you know, I do them too. I go out and I gave presentations. I was doing a presentation along the time that Rihanna and Chris Brown were having a problem. And Rihanna had left Chris Brown because of the way he had hit her. And I remember talking to children at that time. I was at a junior high school and saying, hey, what about this Chris Brown person, you know? And they all kind of went like, yeah, she deserved it.
That's funny that you say that. I spoke at a local community college, and I wasn't speaking about that in specific, but that case came up. It was at about the same time, and one of the women in the group said, well, you know what? If she's bad enough to get in his face, then she got to come into her. And it was really surprising to see like that it was condoned as if it was acceptable behavior. And it was surprising because it started a debate in the class. Yes. But there were people who felt like, hey, you know what? That's the way it is.
Well, this didn't start a debate. You know, the boys were very vocal. The girls kept very silent. You know, one girl said, yeah, you know, if you get in somebody's face, you know, you get what you get. It's kind of the same thing. Right. And I said, okay, you know, most of you are smaller than me. So, I don't know, if you spit in my face, I do have the right to knock you down, kick you, and beat you up. I do have that right. And that's what you say to me, right? And they all looked at me very, you know, confused now, like, where are you getting at with this? I'm like, because that's what you're saying. You're saying that was right and that he didn't have a choice. Right. And that's the problem here, that the person is not choosing to have a choice.
And I think that, you know, one of the issues I have with what I see happening in terms of the amount of violence, you know, that people are exposed to, whether it be through TV, whether it be through video games. I just think violence has become such a big part of our society, and it's sad. It's sad because I remember reading some statistics about how many, per TV, how many rapes a child will see by the time they're age 15 on TV. And we're not even talking about seeing, like, you know, TV at 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I remember one night turning on the TV and, you know, CSI, Criminal Minds, Law
Oh,
and
yeah.
Order, like everything was about killing, sexual molestation. I mean, there was just a lot of violence and a lot of unhealthiness. And I'm saying, like kids are growing up and again, developing those belief systems, and what they watch and what's going into them in terms of developing their beliefs. It's rough. It's rough to see.
It's really rough.
Yeah.
And you can even go a step further. You need to go to some of these sport events that these kids are playing at, and how everybody gets really excited and very aggressive. And so aggression, it's kind of condoned in a lot of ways, depending on what the reason is.
Yeah.
But does a child know how to delineate the difference? We're getting a lot of bullying now, cyberbullying, big time, and I hope to have a show on that one in the near future. But there is a lot of bullying, and and even some of these cartoons. Now, I'm thinking of Looney Tunes when I was a kid. I'm like, oh my gosh, Looney Tunes was so violent,
Right.
and I don't want, I really don't even want my grandchildren looking at Looney Tunes, because Roadrunner is so violent, Coyote gets blown up all the time, but I think about it, and, I remember when I was a kid, and I was watching The Three Stooges. And, Mo always, would poke somebody in the eye. And, of course, Curly would go like this. Well, I did that to my brother, and he didn't do this. So I poked him in the eye. He was very upset. Right. And I said, well, you're really supposed to go like this. You just didn't do that. That's the part you're supposed to do, and he didn't do it. But they do learn aggression. And, obviously, I was learning aggression at that point. But I think I'm playing. I think I'm having a great time. What I'd like to discuss now is what's the difference between your program at the Seafield Center and anger management program?
Okay. So I'm assuming that when you say our program at Seafield, you're talking about the program, the Power and Control program. So the Power and Control program is designed to address the perpetrator, some of the behaviors that the perpetrator exhibits. So the idea behind it is to be able to A, hold them accountable, B, challenge their belief systems. You say you love her, but you hit her. Help me to understand how that is. How does one equal the other? It's like me telling you that I love my car, and then you see me take a key and key my car. You would look at me and say, what I'm saying and what I'm doing don't equal each other. It's not congruent.
Right.
So the idea about the difference between, and this is something that I do a lot of public speaking on, and this is something I'm glad that you brought this up because I think, starting with myself, prior to having any education, any training on domestic violence, I had a person in my substance abuse group many years ago who said that his wife pissed him off and he slapped her and told her to shut the hell up. And I remember saying to him, it sounds like you have some anger issues. Have you ever thought about going to anger management? Because I'm associating if you're hitting somebody, you must be angry. Mm-hmm. And what do we do when we identify anger? We shuffle them off to anger management.
That's right.
Now, I think that anger management, run the right way, could be an excellent program. The issue is that when you're dealing with battering, anger is not the root. So it's kind of like sending somebody with an eating disorder to a sexual addictions group.
Exactly.
If the issue is not anger, right, why are we sending them to anger management? But unfortunately, as I was ignorant to domestic violence, there are many other people that don't know a lot about the difference. So just to kind of put it in a nutshell, most of the guys, first of all, I in my work, I've noticed that guys are more comfortable owning that they have anger issues. It's almost like, right, exactly. There's a certain stature to having anger issues.
Yeah.
The other side of it is that these guys that sometimes will, tell me that they have anger issues. Well, I'll give you an example. I asked somebody, so tell me what got you here? And he told me that he had anger issues. And I said, what makes you think you have anger issues? He says, because when I get angry, I lose it. I lose control. I see red. I see black. I spaz out. I said, really? I said, okay. I said, so he tells me a little bit about the story. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the bottom line is there was an incident that happened with his girlfriend. He says that she said something that bothered him. He got angry. He punched her in the face. Police came. Neighbors called the police. And when the police came, he was very angry. I said, "Did you hit the cop?" And he said, "What?" And I said, "Did you hit the cop?" And he said, "No, I didn't hit no cop." I said, "Why?" He said, "What do you mean, why?" He's a cop. I said, "No, I understand that, but you were saying that he got you really angry. And you told me that, you know, that when you get angry, you lose it and you have an inability to control yourself." And he kind of looked at me with this deer in the headlight look, you know, and then I said, "Let me ask you, you have a job?" He said, "Yeah." "You ever get angry with your boss?" "Yeah." "You ever hit him?" "No." "What about when you went to court? You have a problem with the judge?" "Yeah." "You ever go after her?" "No." "What about when you were your landlord? Did you ever get angry with him?" So I kind of helped them to see that there's been numerous times where they've been very angry, but the way they dealt with that anger was very differently than the way they dealt with the anger with their significant other.
Right.
So if the problem was an inability to control their anger, it would be across the board.
Exactly.
So that's part of the difference. Whereas, on the other hand, when we're talking about domestic violence and we're talking about intimate partner violence, we're talking about power and control. These are behaviors that are designed to gain and maintain control in a relationship. And those behaviors are not limited to violence itself. It could be financial, it could be verbal, it could be emotional, psychological, sexual, isolation. There's many different forms. So to send somebody who an issue is power and control to anger management sometimes can actually be contraindicated. And the other reason is that in anger management, they tell you have a right to be angry.
That's true.
And you have a right to express your anger.
That's right.
As long as you do that appropriately. That's not a good message to give a batterer.
No.
Because the batterer, in my work, what I have identified is the anger stems from an irrational thought. So what we do is we challenge the irrational thought. Why do you think that she should have dinner ready at 5 o'clock for you? And we kind of get into this whole belief system and why they feel that they have a right to have these expectations on her, and when she doesn't, they feel that they have the right to become aggressive. So that's very different than saying you have a right to be angry and then teaching them how to manage that anger.
Oh, that's totally different. That's totally different. And what's interesting is that entitlement. That is about entitlement, to feel that I have the right to direct, you know, your actions. I have a right to state what I want you to do or not do. And then if you don't do that, to act in an aggressive manner. But as you said before, too, it's not always aggression.
Right.
It's not always the act of aggression. Sometimes it's just downright manipulative behavior in order to maintain that control, too. And I've seen that as well, you know, without the aggression. But so that becomes confusing for the victim, you know, because if you're being aggressive, the victim has it. You know, he hit me. All right. But if they're being manipulated, it becomes they're not sure.
Right.
You know, and then, of course, if their self-esteem is lowered, they begin to minimize some of that manipulation. It gets even foggier and
right. Well, think about it this way.
hazy.
There's two things I would say to that. The first thing is not only for the victim, but for the perpetrator as well. I had a client who hated his father because he blamed his father for the death of his mother. His father was extremely abusive. His father at one point had kicked his mother in the stomach. She fell down the stairs. She didn't die at that time, but later on she died from complications. And he always hated his father for what he did with his mother. When I did an assessment on him, it was glaring. The behaviors were so abusive. And he didn't see it. He didn't see himself as being abusive because what he saw was, I never touched my wife. But he didn't see that, you know, he turned the table upside down. He was punching holes in walls. He was breaking the stuff.
It's intimidating.
So he was doing other things, but in his mind, you know, he was looking at it that I've never laid a hand on her. Kind of like, you know, the person who has a problem with drugs and alcohol and says, I go to work every day. I pay my bills. I do the things I have to do. So what if I drink a six-pack? What does that matter to anybody?
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. And then, you know, the other piece I will say also is that, and you've got a ton of work that you've done with survivors of domestic violence, but the limited work that I've done with survivors, look, there was a time where they really loved this guy, and they might still really love this guy.
Oh, many times.
And they want that guy that they fell in love with back.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I always say this when I go out and speak, you know, if the perpetrator slapped you on date one, there would be no date two.
Exactly.
So there is some groundwork that needs to be done, so to speak, or, you know, kind of falling in love and all of that kind of stuff. And then, you know, like I think about, you know, addicts and alcoholics that always talk about chasing that first one. You know, they're always looking for that first high and what that was like.
I call that Alice in Wonderland syndrome, chasing the white rabbit.
Very elusive.
Okay, we're going to take a break and then we will be back. If you've thought of that question, does substance use cause domestic violence? Give us a call at 669-7999. See you in a little bit.
Welcome to Formula Auto Wash, where every day is a great day for a car wash. Open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. Sundays 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. Detailing packages for every budget, starting out at $29.99. 100% hand wash and detail centre. Hogshair and microfiber brushes and mitts. Proudly used in Ecolab Blue Coral soaps and waxes. Formula Auto Wash has served the community for over 30 years. Senior discounts all day, every day. Ladies' Day Wednesday, $3 off any wash. Early bird discount Monday through Thursday till 9:30 a.m. Check out our website, formulaautowash.com.
B&M Performance Cycles, 439 South Main Street, Messina, New York. We handle all parts, accessories, and do all repairs. We can custom build your bike for show or hot rod. We also do New York State inspections on all motorcycles. B&M Performance Cycles. Come see us today.
Welcome back to Voices on Madhouse TV Studios. And I'm Alice, I'm your host. We have Anthony Rizzuto with us, the clinical director of the Power and Control Program at the Seafield Center. And again, if anybody can answer that question, I'd be very happy to hear from you at 669-7999. It's the bottom of the screen. Anthony, I want to come back to that anger management because I have seen that, unfortunately, this kind of education, and I know we've both gone out, we've presented together, isn't always going out to the professional world sometimes, or they're not hearing it. And I know judges, I mean, in the Chris Brown case, he was mandated to anger management. and instead of a batterers program or offenders program. So how do we get this message out there to them?
You know, that's a good point, and that's something that I have, and I know you have, and I know a lot of us that work in this field have been knocking down the doors, so to speak. I will tell you, I do work with a lot of different courts, and some of the resource coordinators, because the judges, they have their forte in what they do.
Exactly.
The resource coordinators really, go out, and most of the courts that I deal with, the resource coordinators are very knowledgeable. I have seen a little bit of a shift in the area of where judges are kind of taking a second look at this about sending to anger management. I still think we have a lot of work to do. But I will tell you, I think we need to just keep plugging away. I'll tell you on my own part what I've done. After a while, I realized that when I was doing, first of all, there's a huge correlation, or there's a huge overlap between substance abuse and domestic violence.
Oh, and I was going to ask you about that. But
very big.
I don't want to answer the question.
No,
so we're going to leave that
definitely
more
not.
towards the end to see if anybody calls in. We're going to answer
Absolutely.
that question. I'm going to let you answer
Absolutely.
that question.
But what I'll say is that it was kind of puzzling to me as a person who is a CASAC, a credentialed and alcohol substance abuse counselor, that I did not have to have 1 minute of training in domestic violence in order to obtain a CASAC. And I thought that there was something wrong with that, because I realized that knowing the overlap, I realized that, wow, I was ill-equipped to deal with any domestic violence issues that came my way. And I felt like I should have had something. So I was blessed to be able to go through the training that Seafield sent me for, and I was able to obtain a lot of knowledge and then continued on my own. But when I had that moment, I decided that, you know what, I have to try and do something about this. And I reached out to OASAS, which provides the licensure for CASACs. And I met with them about 2+ years ago. And I explained to them what my situation was, and I told them that I don't think I'm the only CASAC that was ignorant to domestic violence, and that there should be, like, a part of the curriculum should include domestic violence. And I'm happy to say that as of 2013, anybody who is offering a CASAC curriculum has to have a certain amount of hours in domestic violence. So that was very exciting.
That is
Right.
very exciting.
That was very exciting.
So we're saying that the programs at the colleges are,
Right.
because I know there is a substance abuse program at Suffolk
Yes,
Community
there is.
College.
Bert Kaplan
so
has
they
a great
need
program.
to, present.
OTI,
Yes.
Outreach Training Institute, Resource Training Institute. There's a bunch of different CASAC programs out there.
Wonderful.
And I don't think it should be limited to CASACs. I'm
I
in
don't think
social
so
work school
either.
right now. I'm at Adelphi, and I think that there needs to be a part of anybody who's going to be working as a healthcare professional, I think should have to have a certain amount of hours. And the training that I'm talking about is not trainings necessarily to be able to do treatment or interventions, but at least a do no harm understanding of it. So maybe if I had that understanding, I wouldn't have told that person I mentioned before, did you ever think about going to anger management?
Or marriage
Or I wouldn't have
counseling.
said to him, you ever think of going to marriage counseling? I thought I was doing the right thing. But then looking at it in retrospect, I realized that was absolutely the wrong thing.
Absolutely.
So, but that's one way. I know they had me do a webinar with Oasis, which went out to all the providers. But keep on going out to the courts and keep on just providing education and making yourself available. I think that's what we need to do. We need to be able to use our knowledge base and be able to share our knowledge base. And that's, for me, tomorrow morning I'll be in Dobbs Ferry. I'll be doing a 3-hour class at a college. But this is what we need to do. We need to be able to get it out there, because I think the natural instinct is when you see somebody become aggressive with somebody else, the first thing that comes to mind is anger issues. Mm-hmm. And what we do with anger issues is we send to anger management. And when we see couples having problems where there is some kind of domestic violence involved, one of the first things we think about, at least I think most lay people think about, is you ought to go to marriage counseling or couples counseling. And we know that that's not a good idea either.
Absolutely, they do. But let's talk about the people themselves.
Sure.
They will. I get people who's like, They're very unhappy in their marriage. They've said some things where I'm getting a clue. I'm getting a feel. They're in a intimate partner violence situation. And they'll say, so, and I was thinking of going to marriage counseling. And it's like, well, no, you're not doing that. But of course, that's the idea they're going to get. They're going to get, how do I fix this? How do I handle this? Which is great. We're not saying marriage counseling isn't good if you have a communication problem. But if this is a domestic violence problem, if this is about power, control, and someone else controlling another person, and you're on an uneven playing field here, then it's not the way to go. You need to speak to someone and find out from them. And you're right, a lot of professionals don't know this. And like yourself, I did the same thing because I started in substance abuse. And this is how I moved over to domestic violence myself. It's just getting all those clients in. And there were so many clients that were abused as a child, sexual incest, raped. And I just kept getting them and getting them. I'm like, wow, I'm doing a lot of, intimate partner violence, a lot of abuse counseling here besides the substance abuse.
Right.
So it moved me over to, I started saying, I think I'm going to go do some domestic violence counseling.
Right.
And when they trained me, my mouth hit the floor because I did the same things. I sent people for marriage counseling. I talked about anger management.
And you believed you were doing the right thing.
I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping.
Right.
And
so just to elaborate a little bit on it, what I've learned and the reason that I've learned and that I've experienced that it's contraindicated, if you're in a relationship where domestic violence is present, because I think the audience needs to understand why is that.
Please do explain
So I think that there's three things that come to mind. The first thing being, and you touched on this, inequality. So if the relationship is where one person is the dominant one in the relationship and the other person maybe doesn't have a voice or is afraid to be able to say what they need to say because of it leads to all kinds of crazy behaviors, I think that for the person who is on the receiving end of that and they go to see a third party, most likely they're not going to feel comfortable being open and honest. So my experience is that, and I'll tell you, in working in the boroughs, there were situations where the couples, if they wanted to get their kid back, were required to go. So I had done a lot of training on that because they were being required to go to marriage counseling or couples counseling to be able to get access to their kids again. So I think that in a case like that there, okay, fine, I'll go, but I'm not saying nothing. So yeah, we have 3 kids and Johnny plays soccer and such. It's not going to have any effect if the people can't be open and honest. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that there are situations where I've seen that the victim says, yes, finally I have a professional that I can tell and hopefully they'll be able to do something about it and it's going to get better. And they'll go to the counselor and they'll say, you see this? This happened last night. And over here, 3 weeks ago, this has been going on for 3 months in my home. My experience is wait until we get outside. And,
Sure.
and that endangers, that puts the victim in a very dangerous situation.
That's scary.
Right. And then the third part is that sometimes when you go to a marriage counselor, most marriage counselors don't have a lot of experience in domestic violence. So I have seen situations and heard of situations where a couple will go to a marriage counselor, let's say a psychologist or a licensed social worker or whatever professional that would do marriage counseling. And a lot of times they will look at the survivor and say, do you see how when you say that, that gets him very angry? So they've just re-victimized the victim. Without even knowing it, they've colluded with the irrational thought that the reason I do this is because she gets me so angry.
Oh, my goodness. I had a client that is exactly what happened. She was in an abusive situation. She was seeing me for counseling after seeing one of my talks at Seafield. And he decided, because she started getting kind of strong, he decided he was going to go to counseling. He said, would you come with me? And she did. And that's exactly what happened. The counselor said, you see how you say that, and it hurts his feelings. Right. The only thing is she had already been having counseling with me, and had heard the whole discussion at the Seafield Center, and was very strong about it.
And again, I don't think that that clinician was doing it with any intention
No,
of putting
they
her
don't
in
know.
harm. Or I just think that it comes from a place of a lack of experience and knowledge about domestic violence and the intricacies and the dynamics that work in the domestic violence. So my experience has been that it's not a good thing. I will tell you that what I've seen is that in cases, because many times, the couples choose to stay together. And it's not for us to say you have to leave or you don't have to leave or whatever. That's not our position.
That takes away self-determination.
Exactly. So I think that in cases where couples do decide that they are going to stay together, in an ideal world, we'd like to see the perpetrator get services and make some changes in their behavior, if possible, if it's going to happen. The survivor to get some support for herself. And then potentially in the future, if they were going to do something like that, it should be with somebody who's an expert in domestic violence. Somebody who has, like for instance yourself, somebody who has an understanding of both sides, who understands, has worked with the victims, has worked with the perpetrators, which you can stand there and you can see things for what they are as opposed to using traditional methods to work with couples.
Yes, I agree with you. And unfortunately, like you said, there's a lot of marriage counselors that don't know. But again, it's not to do harm, but if more of the universities were doing this, and I'm going to put in doctors and nurses in there as well, because they may not be counseling, but they're the first line that may be seeing these victims. We're going to be right back in a little bit, so don't go away. See you in a little bit.
Today we're sitting in with Chris, doing a reading. Let's see what's going on.
Okay, I've never had a reading like this before, so just bear with me. I'm seeing bugs.
Bugs? I thought you were a psychic medium.
I know, that's what's confusing. Hold on. Do you want the good news or the bad news?
I'll take the bad news.
I think these are spirit bugs.
Spirit bugs? I've never heard of spirit bugs.
That's just it. Do you want the good news?
Yes.
I know Joe from Bug Busters of Long Island. He'll take care of your problem.
That's great.
Hi, I'm Vinny, owner of VMD Electric. Family owned and operated since 1996, serving all of Nassau and Suffolk County. You can call us anytime, night or day, at 631-669-6915 for all your residential and commercial needs. Here are some photos of our current projects.
Suffolk County Gold Refinery for the highest paid prices for your gold, diamonds, and jewelry with cash on the spot. Visit their showroom for unbelievable prices on fine jewelry and engagement rings. 71 Millbar Boulevard, Farmingdale, 631-777-CASH. Suffolk County Gold Refinery for the highest paid prices for your gold, diamonds, and jewelry with cash on the spot. Visit their showroom for unbelievable prices on fine jewelry and engagement rings. 71 Millbar Boulevard, Farmingdale, 631-777-CASH. For the highest paid prices for your gold, diamonds, and jewelry with cash on the spot. Suffolk County Gold Refinery, 631-777-CASH.
Hi, welcome back to Voices on Madhouse TV Studios. I'm Alice. I want to ask you a question. Do you know of the murders in the United States today, that 33% of the women and 3% of the men are being murdered by the intimate partner. Do you know that 65 to 75% of the families that are being battered, the children are also being battered? I want you to think about that. And if you have that question answered that I gave you earlier, does substance use cause domestic violence? Please call in and give us your answer, because we will be answering it later on. Welcome back.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you.
It's so hard to get to you, too, because you are out there just putting the word out. That's one thing I do know about you, Anthony. You are out there talking about it all the time. You are teaching all the time. And that's really the most important thing, is education, education. I've been out with doctors. I feel the same way as you. I think this program should be in the medical schools. I think they should be in the nursing programs. These people are in the emergency rooms. The victims are coming in, even if they're not battered. You have other symptoms. If you have somebody coming in with frequent stomach pain or frequent migraines, if this is consistent and you're seeing certain behavior and he doesn't want to leave her side, he doesn't, because there are clues, and they need to know what that is and then how to address it. And they don't. They don't. It's not in the programs.
I think even working with the individuals, kind of like, in substance abuse, the more I do this work, the more I kind of say to myself, and I remember when I was in school, when I first decided to come into this field, I remember a professor asking me, like, what part of substance abuse do you want to work with? And I didn't know exactly what he meant. He said, well, do you want to work with adolescents? Do you want to work in prevention? Do you want to work in long-term? What do you want to do? And I said, honestly, I don't know. I said, I love working with kids. I said, so I'm guessing it would be something with kids. And but he kind of got me thinking. And there was a classmate of mine who, I remember we were at lunch one day together, and we were having a discussion of how can we make an impact, and because for me, that's really what it's about. If I invest myself, like I belong to a lot of coalitions, and I belong to a lot of task forces, and I really don't like being involved in things that are not going to produce something. So I don't need another meeting to go to sit around the table to talk about ideas. I really am about action and about being able to go forward. And I feel like what we all have to offer is our own experiences, our own education. So anytime I go out there to speak, I'll tell people that I'm going to share with you what the education I've had and the experience I've had of working with over 1,000 batterers, because that's something that's unique that I can give you that you might not have already. But going back to the other idea was I felt that prevention work was really important, and I felt that if I wanted to make the biggest impact in substance abuse, I felt that working on the demand side of it, trying to get to kids before they ever got started. And the way to do that, I thought, would have been to take a look at the risk factors. So, self-esteem, low self-esteem, insecurities, different things that put kids at risk, and then create a curriculum and go and bring it into the schools, but not in high school. In high school, it's too late already.
It's too late.
I'm talking elementary and junior high school to already start working with kids, not necessarily about drugs and alcohol, but on building them up to the point where, I'm in a good place, and peer pressure wouldn't have the impact that maybe it has.
Right.
And I think that when it comes to domestic violence, I think that working with children and providing an understanding of what healthy relationships look like, I think that's imperative. I remember going to a presentation where you were one of the panelists, and there was 3 other panelists from different agencies. I remember one of the panelists, it was the first time I heard talk literally about prevention and domestic violence. And I remember her saying and associating it with smoking cigarettes. And she showed some cartoons about how all of a sudden smoking became non-cool.
That's right.
And she was saying about how is it, if we could get it to be non-cool, to be, aggressive, abusive, that kind of stuff, if we could get to that point, we might be able to make a change. And I'll tell you that it's really interesting. In doing this work, I'm always surprised at some of the things that I hear. In this one particular day, this one client had asked me, he said to me, we were doing that particular evening, we were doing the topic of conflict with respect. Okay. And as we were doing this topic, he said to me, you know, time out. He said, I really think that you guys are trying to make us soft, and you guys don't live in the real world with this stuff that you're talking about. I said, really? I said, what makes you say that? He said, let me ask you a question. He said, you never thought about choking your wife? And I looked at him and I said, give me a second. I said, no, I never thought about choking my wife. I never thought about choking any woman that I went out. Matter of fact, I never thought about choking another human being. And I'm not going to say what he said, but it was bleep, then maybe I really belong here. And you know, and we kind of processed that. Now, here's a person who was an alcoholic, who had also domestic violence issues, and in his brain, when he gets into a confrontation with his significant other, one of the pages that opens up for him is grab her by the throat. Mm-hmm. That doesn't come up in my head. If I have a confrontation with my wife, that's not one of the options that comes up on how to resolve this problem. That's what comes up for him. That's one of the ones that comes up with him.
Right.
So that leads me to believe that when he was developing, that was a viable option. He learned that somewhere. We know that domestic violence is a learned behavior. Mm-hmm. So I think it's so imperative for us to start working with people as they're young and start, you know, there's some groups out there called Engaging Men, you know, to start working with men, holding men accountable to end domestic violence.
And we keep saying men. Anthony, what is the percentage of the perpetrator being male versus female?
I don't know the exact numbers, and I'm glad you say that because I want to just validate the fact that I have seen women abusers and I have seen male victims. I think the reported cases in heterosexual relationships is somewhere like 85 to 90% of male being the abuser and females being the victim or the survivor of the abuse. Not to say that it can't be the other way, but the numbers are so high, and the training that I had was working with male abusers. So I'm not negating the fact that there are men victims and there are female abusers. Right. There's no doubt that that is the case, that that's possible. But the numbers are just so high, you know, in male. And I think, again, a lot of that, I think, comes back to this idea of gender norms.
Well, how many men are going to go to the police station and go, my wife just smacked me upside my head because he, as you said, it's learned behavior. So in his home learned, you don't hit a woman. You don't do those things. There's a way to, you know, work these things out, but now he has an aggressive female. Mm-hmm. So how does he go to the police and say, you know, my wife just took a pan and swiped me on my head? And that could be lethal.
Oh, absolutely.
So he's probably not going to do that unless he's so
100%.
bad. So I think the numbers are somewhat skewed. You know, I'm sure there's probably more men out there that are being abused and they're not speaking up. But I did do some research on it, whereas most of the time the women aren't physically aggressive, but they do the emotional, and I have had, you know, in the victim side, I have had some men in program who were the victim, and it was things like you can't speak to your children from another marriage, or, you know, you can't call them, you can't spend time, and they're just gentlemen, you know, so they're in a quandary and they're coming in for group. Right. So they're not getting beaten. Also, the lethality is different. Right. You know, it becomes more lethal when a man hits a woman. It's a higher lethality, a possibility of death. So but again, we're not saying men aren't abused also, they are. But are there programs taking women in for as an offender?
Yes, there are programs. We don't have that service available at Seafield. I believe, I'm not sure. I think the retreat might have some services. I'm not sure if Vibes does, but I have heard of programs in the city in the boroughs that do provide services for female aggressors.
Okay, great, great. So you've heard that. So if you feel, and unfortunately, how many times are they mandated by court or freely decide to go?
Majority, I would say, are either mandated, or we screen everybody that comes through the door. So they're either, sometimes they'll be mandated, a majority of them are mandated. We will identify some, and then some, will come forward saying, I'm here because I want to make a change in my life. But as we do the work, we hear the reality of it is that I can't go back home unless I get into a program.
All right, so they've been given an ultimatum.
Right, to do something. But, just to go back to the idea about, you were talking about the female aggressors, I've had some limited experience, but I have worked with some female aggressors. And it was interesting because with the few that I did work, every single one of them was sexually molested.
That's interesting.
Every single one of them. So it was really interesting because, as I dug deeper and got into it, some of the stories were very horrific, and how they decided to deal in relationships with men. My work kind of revealed that there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of hurt, and a lot of times it led to stabbings, it led to a lot of physical aggression on the part of the female aggressors that I worked with, at least.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting research to do.
Oh, yeah.
See how
Correlation.
Wow, the correlation between sexual abuse or sexual trauma, I should say, because it could be rape or sexual incest or of any kind. How many of them grow up to be abusive physically or or aggressive that way? That's interesting. I hadn't. You're in this field and you just some things you've never read about. You just come across and you start looking at it. You just start looking and say, wow.
Even if you take a look at professions, without getting into any specific, but you look at like what professions tend to have a higher core rate of, we won't even go there, but I think that there is research that can be done, and, that shows that people that work in certain fields have a higher percentage tendencies, of having aggressive behaviors.
Sure. Or also, there are professions where you see more victims.
Yeah, I would see that to be consistent, absolutely.
Yeah, there are professions where you see more victims, and it might be part of that personality to want to care for others that creates, I don't know, overlooking certain things, that kind of personality that's going to overlook, I'm going to minimize, going to try to rationalize, do all of those things. So you do see the victim in certain professions, a high degree of that. This is very interesting. Once again, I just want to say this is Anthony Rizzuto. He is the clinical director of the Power and Control Program at the Seafield Center. Anthony, why don't you give the number to that center?
Sure. It's 516-809-7944. That's my number. The number to the facility itself for the inpatient is 631-288-1122. And that's for inpatient detox and inpatient rehab. We also have 5 outpatient facilities in Riverhead, Medford, Patchogue, Amityville, and Mineola. And we have 17 recovery homes as well.
So if you need any services, whether you need services for substance use or for aggressive behavior, for being an offender, if it comes to you, if you're feeling, oh, I got to change my life, oh, please, call the Seafield Center. You have the number.
Thanks, Alice.
Thank you. This is so interesting. So what we're going to do, and no one's called, so we're going to answer this question for you. Does substance abuse cause domestic violence?
Well, here's what I'll tell you. In my years of doing the work, the answer is no. If we're talking about does substance abuse cause domestic violence, the answer is no. Does substance abuse play a role in domestic violence? Absolutely. Is there a correlation between substance abuse and domestic violence? Absolutely. So I think I'll take a couple of minutes just to discuss when we talk about a cause and effect relationship, it would be something along the lines of, I take a knife, I make a cut, I bleed.
Right.
I take a knife, I make another cut, I'm going to bleed some more.
Mm-hmm.
Every time that I make a cut, I bleed. Cause and effect. Every time I do this action, I get this result, 100% of the times. That's a cause and effect relationship. Substance abuse and domestic violence don't have that relationship. And we know that they don't because we know that there are a lot of people that are extremely abusive that have never had a drink or a drug in their life.
Right.
We also know that there are a lot of people who have a serious problem with chemical dependency who aren't abusive.
That's right.
So it doesn't have a cause and effect relationship. But that being said, there is no doubt that substance abuse increases the frequency of the abuse in a person who's abusive. So if a person has abusive tendencies and belief systems and behaviors and consumes alcohol or other substances, my experience is that the abuse increases. The frequency of the abuse happens more often. The other piece is that the severity of the damage that happens is greater when a person is under the influence. And there are two substances in particular that when a perpetrator of domestic violence is under the influence, that the damage is greater. And those two substances are alcohol and crystal meth.
Okay.
When an abuser is under the influence of either alcohol or crystal meth, the damage that happens in the incident is usually much greater than under normal circumstances. So, you know, the short answer to the question is it doesn't cause it, but it definitely plays a role. You know, and it's something that I've seen over the years that I've been doing the work, and big part of my work is helping to get rid of that. Because a lot of the batterers, when I ask them, so tell me, why did you, you know, do you love your wife? Yeah. And why do you do what you do? And they say, you know, I was drunk.
Oh, yeah.
I was high. And some of them, I believe that they believe that that's the case. But then as we kind of process it and we go through it and we talk about it, what I've noticed in some cases is I've seen people who might not have been physically abusive, who when they became under the influence, intoxicated, they've become physically abusive. But then as we've processed, we've identified that they were abusive before they even drank, although it wasn't physical.
Right.
They were abusive in other forms, emotionally, financially,
Exactly.
other forms. And they weren't willing, or they wouldn't cross that line to raise their hands. But when they were under the influence of alcohol or drugs, that they crossed that line to go to escalate even higher to physical abuse.
Absolutely.
And physical abuse, you know, like I look at it that it's an escalation. Kind of like in substance abuse, you know, historically the gateway drugs are nicotine, alcohol, and marijuana. Those are the substances that usually are the first ones. That's on this end of the spectrum. And on this end of the spectrum would be intravenous heroin usage, smoking crack cocaine. With domestic violence, usually the first forms of abuse are verbal, emotional, and on this end is the, you know, the physical abuse and even more.
Well, that also happens as, you know, I've worked with both, but I mostly work with victims. They have called me and said, oh, I don't really think, you know, if he wasn't drinking, everything would be fine. Can you get me help for that? And I'll go, oh, okay. If he isn't drinking, so that means when he's not drinking, he speaks to you with respect. He's never demeaned you. He's never put you down. He's never used words he shouldn't use towards you. Has he always spoken to you in a respectful manner? And they'll go, well, no. I'm like, well, then that's abuse. You know, he just wasn't hitting you before. I have a phone call here. Am I taking that call? Okay. Hello, this is Alice of Voices. Who am I speaking to?
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. This is Chris. I'm watching your show. Congratulations on your show, by the way. It's great.
Thank you, Chris. How are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. I just wanted to stress to the people out there that are watching, because your guest is so interesting. Your show is so interesting. I don't understand why people are not calling in. They should know that nobody will know who they are when they call in. There's so many people that are in need of your services out there, And I just, I applaud you for having such a great show, and the guests that you have on tonight. I just wish more people would be calling in and asking for help and trying to get some ideas of how to get help.
Thank you. I wish too, and I think over time that'll happen. And Chris brought up a very important point. You don't have to give your name when you call. You could say, I don't want to give my name. You can ask whatever question you like at all. You could ask myself or Anthony. But that's a very important point. Thank you, Chris, for calling and saying that. I wish I'd said that earlier.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here, I'm watching it, and by the way, very photogenic. And I just wanted to say that no one has to give their name. And the people are watching, they definitely, they know who they are. They know they need to call you and want to talk to you. So everybody should call and get some advice. So great job, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank
you, have a great
Chris.
Night.
Have a great night.
Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you.
All right, bye now.
We're going to be closing up now. Wrong button. I'm technically challenged. Okay, we're going to be winding up. So do you have some last words to say for our viewers, Anthony?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on. Thank you for the opportunity. And I think
pleasure.
that we can't put this out there enough. And I think that, with setups like this, you have the ability to touch a lot of people. And to what the caller said, we plant seeds, and it needs to happen on their own time. But I would say that if you are either a survivor of domestic violence, or whether you are a perpetrator of domestic violence, or whether you struggle with substance abuse issues, help is available. I've learned that people who struggle with chemical dependency aren't bad people. They're sick people that need help. And I would encourage people to get the help they need. Help is available. And the last piece I'll say is that domestic violence isn't only between the two partners.
That's right.
The children are severely impacted. I don't care how young they are. Studies show that kids are severely impacted when they witness or in an environment where domestic violence is present.
Absolutely. It affects the family and the community. So, and remember that. You want to give your number one last time?
Sure. It's 516-809-7944.
Okay. I just want to say good evening. I want to put a shout out to my Aunt Pearl. Happy birthday, Pearl. And I want to say next week we have Heather Summerstein. You know her.
Oh, yes.
And she is going to talk about what she had experienced in an abusive relationship. So come back next week, and we hope to be seeing you. Good evening.